The air inside the Judiciary Oversight Chamber felt deceptively controlled, like the moment before a summer storm when the skies pretend everything is still. Chairs creaked softly as aides shifted in their seats. The fluorescent lights buzzed above rows of long mahogany desks, casting sterile halos on the polished floor. Cameras had been barred. Journalists were only allowed access to the outer vestibule, but phones were still present, always present. And at the center of it all sat Donald J. Trump, shoulders stiff, suit sharp, gaze alert yet defensive as though the very walls of the room conspired against him. Across the aisle, Jasmine Crockett sat composed, her navy blazer crisp against a high-back leather chair. Her expression betrayed nothing but clarity. She didn't posture, didn't preen. Instead, her hands moved steadily over a thin folder, fingers brushing the edge of a page marked with case citations and footnotes. When her time was yielded, she didn't raise her voice. She didn't grandstand. She simply leaned into the mic. Mr. Trump, in your own words, you asked the Georgia Secretary of State to find you 11,780 votes. What part of that request falls under the duties of a sitting or former president? Trump's mouth curled slightly. He didn't respond. She continued, are you asserting executive immunity over a post office phone call to state officials demanding they overturn certified election results? A low murmur passed through the room. She kept going, precise and slow. This hearing isn't about politics. It's about power, how it's used, and how it corrupts. Trump sat forward, his hands twitching slightly against the table. His lawyer shifted uncomfortably beside him, whispering something he didn't seem to hear. You weaponize the executive office not to serve, but to survive. That is not protected. That is criminal exposure. It was then without warning, without decorum that Trump stood. His palm slapped the desk with a dull, thunderous thud that snapped heads in every direction. Get her out, he bellowed, voice soaked in fury, fingers pointed straight at her like a verdict. She has no right to question me. None. For a moment, no one moved. Aid folders froze mid-page. Chairs stopped shifting. Even the digital clocks blinking over the exit doors seemed to pause. Jasmine didn't flinch. She didn't look away. Her gaze was fixed, calm, immovable. Her voice sliced through the silence, not raised, not rushed, but weighted like a final ruling. You don't get to eject the Constitution because you're uncomfortable, Mr. Trump. Trump's mouth opened again, but nothing came out. I was elected by 750,000 people who expect me to protect the rule of law, not your feelings. The room remained hushed. You don't scare me, and frankly, you shouldn't scare this country anymore. There were 46 seconds between his outburst and her final word, and by the end of it, real power had shifted. Not because she yelled louder, but because she didn't need to. The official docket labeled it as routine, review of executive immunity in context of ongoing investigations. Just another procedural hearing lost in the shuffle of posturing lawmakers and sluggish bureaucracy. But that was a lie. This wasn't just oversight. This was strategy. A behind-the-curtain recalibration of political power in real time. 3 months prior, Trump had been in charges ranging from obstruction of justice to conspiracy against the United States. His legal team scrambled across states, filing motions, burying prosecutors in paperwork, and claiming presidential immunity with the desperation of a man cornered. Now, the committee was tasked with dissecting that very claim. Can a former president who no longer holds office invoke Article 2 to shield himself from criminal prosecution? The nation's answer depended on this room, that it was supposed to be quiet, technical, no press, no speeches. Just legal minds behind microphones. But Jasmine Crockett knew better. So did Trump. He wasn't supposed to be there. No formal roll number subpoena, no clearance, and yet he appeared, unannounced, flanked by aides and attorneys like a king visiting the gallows he once commanded. Some suspected it was a power move, a media trap. Others believed it was fear. Fear that someone in this room, not a judge, not a prosecutor, but a legislator, might dismantle the last illusion of his invincibility. Crockett had been added to the roster at the 11th hour. Most thought she'd play clean-up 10 minutes, at most. But she walked in with a stack of case law transcripts and unshakable composure. The room itself betrayed subtle hierarchy. The Republican chair, a long-serving loyalist to the former president, sat stone-faced behind the gavel, hands folded. To his right, a parade of GOP allies prepared to sanitize Trump's past. To his left, Democrats shuffled quietly, eyes narrowed, waiting for the right moment. When Trump entered, everything shifted. Staffers stopped typing. One member lowered his coffee cup mid-sip and just stared. Phones were raised under desks, covertly recording what C-SPAN cameras had been denied. He didn't sit at the witness table. He chose a desk parallel to the Panola, calculated breach of protocol, an observer in name, a disruptor in truth. And Jasmine saw through it. She studied him the way a surgeon examines a tumor, calculating its shape, its spread, its refusal to admit it doesn't belong. Caught her stare. She didn't look away. By now, word had leaked into the hall. A few reporters, barred from the chamber, paced just beyond the doors. Live streams began surfacing on anonymous social media accounts. Audio leaked in broken snippets. She's pressing him. Double quotes. He's glaring. Yeah, she's not backing down. Inside, Jasmine's turn approached. A Republican colleague leaned forward and whispered, "Take it easy." She gave a small smile, almost maternal. Easy doesn't seem to be working lately. And when her name was called, she stood not with fanfare, not with fire but with finality, as if this was never a hearing. It was always a reckoning. Trump adjusted his tie. The room braced. Because behind that closed door, the lines had been drawn. And no one, not the chair, not the staffers, not the ex-president sitting 20 feet away, could stop what was coming. She didn't rush. Jasmine Crockett unfolded her notes slowly, flipping past the political fluff and glossy testimony. No grandstanding, no platitudes, just ink, law, and a razor-sharp memory trained for courtroom heat. "Mr. Trump," she began, voice steady, "are you asserting that a president while no longer in office might claim executive immunity for actions taken as a private citizen?" Trump leaned back, lips curled into a faint smirk. He didn't answer, only looked at his lawyer, who nodded as if cueing a stage actor from the wings. Her eyes didn't leave his. "Because if so, I'd like to ask, under what article, what clause, and what precedent?" A ripple of discomfort passed through the room. Trump's lawyer adjusted his mic. "The former president is not required to answer that question in this context. We're here to observe." Jasmine gave a dry smile. "With all due respect, counsel, the former president decided to speak the moment he yelled at a sitting member of Congress. Now he's part of the record." Trump's jaw twitched. She flipped to a marked page. "Let's discuss Article 2, the scope of presidential powers during a term and their limits beyond it." He shifted in his seat. "Can Article 2 protect an ex-president's attempt to pressure a state official into falsifying certified election results?" she asked, eyes scanning the room, daring anyone to object. Silence. She continued. "Mr. Trump, on January 2, 2021, you made a phone call to Georgia Secretary of State, Brad Raff. On that call you said, quote, 'I just want to find 11,780 votes, which is one more than we have.'" She let the quote hang in the air like smoke. Trump didn't move. "That call was made weeks after your term had effectively ended. You had no legal standing, no constitutional authority. So again, on what legal basis does that conversation fall under executive protection?" A GOP senator coughed, as if to interrupt. Jasmine spoke louder. "I'll help clarify," she said, picking up a copy of the call transcript and holding it aloft. "This wasn't governance, it was coercion. You weren't safeguarding democracy, you were negotiating its price." Now Trump's face flushed. The smirk was gone. His fingers tapped against the desk, quick, agitated, like the ticking of a cheap watch, too close to exploding. She turned to the committee. "In United States v. Nixon, the court held that not even a sitting president is above the law when criminal evidence is subpoenaed. In Clinton v. Jones, the court ruled a sitting president could face civil litigation, and in Trump v. Vance, this very man," she motioned toward him, "was told that presidential immunity does not extend to state-level criminal investigations." She paused, eyes narrowing slightly. "That means even when in office, your immunity wasn't total, and now you're not even in office." A low whistle echoed from someone in the back row before being silenced with a stern glance. Trump leaned forward now, elbows on the table, fists clenched, but still he didn't speak. Voice dipped lower. "So the question becomes simple. Why are we pretending otherwise?" She turned the transcript face up on her desk. "Is it because he's wealthy, because he has fans, because the threat of his anger still controls this room?" Her gaze swept across both sides of the aisle. "I didn't run for office to play pretend. I ran to hold power accountable, even if it screams." Another silence, not empty, charged. She sat down. Her chair didn't creak. Trump exhaled sharply, chest rising and falling. His lawyer leaned in to whisper something. This time he didn't nod. Because the first strike had landed, and everyone in that room knew the damage was already done. By now, the temperature in the room had shifted from procedural to volatile. The Republican chair sat tense, lips pressed in a flat line. He adjusted his papers repeatedly. Swing aides whispered behind their hands. Phones buzzed silently in pockets as staffers outside the chamber began texting the uncontainable truth. Trump's boiling. Jasmine Crockett had returned to her seat, but her presence still filled the air. Her words hadn't dissipated, they lingered like the smell of ozone before lightning strikes. Trump hadn't spoken since, but his silence wasn't commit, was coiled. He leaned in slightly, fingers drumming fast and uneven, his eyes bloodshot, and Nerad remained fixed not on Crockett, but on the chair of the committee, as if daring him to regain control. The chair didn't. Then she did it again. Jasmine, deliberate, unfazed, turned her mic back on. "One more clarification for the record," she said, voice smooth as wet stone. "The Constitution doesn't grant eternal protection to ex-presidents. It grants conditional authority, power that ends when the people say it does." Trump's hand gripped the edge of the desk. "In fact," she went on, flipping to another document, "a citizen named Donald Trump, no longer in office, making unlawful demands to state officials would be judged not by legacy, but by legality." The room froze. It was that last line, "a citizen named Donald Trump," that did it. He stood. The motion was sudden, almost violent. His chair slid back with a harsh screech. His fist struck the desk with such force that the microphones rattled. The committee room, already tense, inhaled all at once. "Get her out," he roared. The words echoed through the chamber, bouncing off the marble and the silence that followed. "You weren't even supposed to be in here." His finger pointed like a dagger across the room. "You're grandstanding, lying, making it about you. This is my hearing, my name. You're nobody." Gasps, audible ones, no longer hidden. The committee chair tapped his gavel once softly, uncertainly. Jasmine didn't move. She stared at him, steady, like she had expected this exact eruption. Not surprised, not shaken, just ... waiting. He kept going. "This is a witch hunt, another setup. You people don't care about the lawyer, you care about your damn self." Still, she said nothing. Trump's lawyer tugged lightly at his sleeve, muttering under his breath, "Sir, please, sit down." But Trump's voice had taken on a life of its own, now louder, unraveling, bruised by ego. "You sit there with your papers and your smug face and act like you're smarter than me." And then she spoke. Not loudly, not to interrupt, but like a wall, quiet, immovable. "You don't get to eject the Constitution because you're uncomfortable." He stopped mid-sentence. She stood. "I am not your staff. I am not your opponent in a game show. I am a lawmaker, an officer of the Constitution, and you're a man under legal scrutiny." Trump blinked. For the first time since entering the room, he didn't know what to say. "You screamed because you thought it would work," she continued, "but the room is still here, and I'm still here, and so is your record." She turned, not to him, but to the committee. Let the outburst reflect the fragility of the defense. Trump slowly sank back into his chair, breathing hard. The flush had spread down his neck. The committee chair, now red-faced himself, pounded. They gavelled twice, or to let the record show the members' time has concluded. But it hadn't, not really, because Trump's voice had broken the silence and Jasmine's had rewritten the rules. There was a stillness after the yell, the kind of stillness that doesn't feel like silence but suspension, like the room itself was holding its breath, unsure what reality it had just crossed into. Trump had sat back down, but his anger hadn't. It lingered like smoke, seeping into every corner of the chamber. His jaw clenched, his fingers tapped, but his voice, once the loudest thing in the building, was gone. And across from him, Jasmine Crockett stood. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't strike back with volume. She struck with precision, like a scalpel, not a hammer. "Let me be perfectly clear," she said, eyes locked on the committee, but her words aimed straight through Trump's chest. "You do not get to enter this room and interrupt a lawful hearing, and then demand silence when the law speaks back." Her voice was smooth, sharp, each word enunciated like she'd written them 1,000 times in her head before today. "You don't get to scream. Get her out in a place where the Constitution, not you, decides who belongs." Trump stared, motionless. No more gestures, no more outbursts. "This chamber is not your rally stage. It is not your social feed. It is not a throne room. It is a place of record, and you just entered it as a defendant, Woodloud, cornered, and without immunity." Somewhere, a pen dropped, a page flipped, but no one spoke. Jasmine continued, her tone cooling even further, more dangerous in its restraint. "You may have gotten used to controlling rooms like this, 2 intimidating judges, 2 bending rules until they bent back for you, but I am not here to placate you. She took a slow breath. Each word landed like a gavel. I was elected to protect what you've spent for years dismantling, and I will not be shouted out of my oath. Trump shifted in his seat again, but not forward this time. Backward, retreating into stillness. Crockett's voice softened, not in kindness, but in command. You keep calling it a witch hunt, but what does it say about a man who thinks the law is a spellcast only when it doesn't serve him? A low murmur moved across the room. She turned slightly toward the chair. I request, Mr. Chairman, that these remarks be entered into the permanent record of this proceeding. Without redaction, without revision. No one objected. No one dared. She leaned into the mic for one final line, almost whispered, but broadcast louder than any yell. The Constitution is not yours to interrupt. Then she sat. It had taken 46 seconds. Not a speech. Not a performance. ARECALIBRATION. In less than a minute. She had taken control of a room designed to deny her authority, stood toe-to-toe with a former president in freefall, and reminded every official watching inside and beyond these walls why law matters more than legacy. Reporters outside the chamber, who had only caught fragments of Trump's outburst, were now glued to live captions and leaks. Did she really say that? She didn't blink 46 seconds. That's it. On social media, the clip would be trimmed and looped. The phrase "you don't get to eject the Constitution" would echo on every feed. Hashtags would bloom, TikTok's reaction videos, commentaries by constitutional scholars and teenagers alike. But in the room, there were no edits, no graphics, just Crockett's voice and Trump's silence. She didn't gloat. She didn't glance in his direction again, because it wasn't about him anymore. It was about the law, spoken in the tone that had been denied for far too long. It didn't take long. Within minutes of Crockett's searing 46-second rebuttal, the air shifted again, this time into something colder, more rehearsed. The shock had faded. Now came the spin. Representative Jim Jordan was the first to react, rising slowly like he'd just remembered what role he was supposed to play. His voice came calm, measured, almost fatherly. "I'd like to remind my colleagues," he began, "that this committee is bound by rules of decorum and professional conduct." A few Republican members nodded in rhythm, as if it was all part of a silent cue. The phrase decorum rolled from their mouths like a life preserver in rough seas, but it wasn't decorum they wanted to restore. It was dominance. Jordan continued. Congresswoman Crockett's comments, whatever their intent, struck directly at the integrity of this chamber and were clearly meant to provoke a response. Jasmine remained seated, calm. She didn't even blink. Another member chimed in, voice laced with carefully contained indignation. I motioned to strike the Congresswoman's statements from the official record. A wave of murmurs passed through the committee, but even that motion sounded hollow. The damage had already been done, and they knew it. The internet knew it. And somewhere, outside these marble walls, America had already picked its side. Still, they kept going. Smokescreen after smokescreen. Senator Josh Hawley leaned forward, eyebrows raised with faux concern. This hearing was never meant to be a political spectacle. We were here to ask constitutional questions, not turn this into a trial by grandstanding. Crockett's mic lit up, but she didn't speak yet. She waited. She let their accusations stack, let them climb their little hill of outrage, and when they finally paused, she spoke once more, in that same unbothered tone. "You didn't object when Mr. Trump shouted me down in this chamber. You didn't motion to strike his words. So your concern for decorum rings. Selective." The Republican chair's gavel came down, not to silence her but to move on. "The record will reflect all remarks. We are in recess for 5 minutes," he muttered. He didn't meet her eyes. Behind the scenes, Trump's legal team had already mobilized. Press statements were being drafted. Friendly outlets were being briefed. The narrative was being assembled fast and familiar, that Crockett was the aggressor, that Trump had merely reacted under provocation, that this was a trap, staged by Democrats to provoke a meltdown. Fox News broke in with an emergency banner. Dems ambush Trump in cloth store. Hearing outbursts taken out of context. It was predictable, but it wasn't effective, because while the right scrambled to manage optics, the left was already clipping the moment, quoting it, threading it across platforms. The full transcript of Crockett's 46-second statement was posted on C-SPAN's official website less than 10 minutes after recess. TikTok was faster. In one looped video, her final line, "The Constitution is not yours to interrupt," was overlaid with slow-motion footage of Trump's outburst, backed by symphonic strings. It hit 500,000 views before the committee even reconvened. Still, the GOP had to try. During the recess, Whispers turned to strategy. There was talk of censuring her, of issuing a formal rebuke, of framing the entire moment as a threat to judicial neutrality, but it was already too late, because the more they tried to control the narrative, the more obvious the power shift became. Crockett hadn't played into Trump's hands. She had taken the table from under him and sat him down. The gavel echoed as the room came back to order, but the silence that followed was different, now denser, more electric, not out of fear, not out of tension, but because everyone in that chamber, friend or foe, now understood something unmistakable. Jasmine Crockett wasn't backing down. The chair cleared his throat, his voice brittle. Congresswoman Crockett, you may proceed with your line of questioning. She stood. No theatrics, no dramatics. Just her. A legal brief rested in her left hand, fingers slightly trembling, not from fear, but from the gravity of what came next. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't perform for cameras. Her tone was that of a surgeon, precise, unrelenting. Let's talk about the myth of executive immunity, she began. Trump folded his arms tightly. His lawyers flanked him, leaning forward just enough to make their presence felt. Crockett continued, eyes never leaving his. The former president has argued both in this committee and in various courts that his actions on January 6, his communications with foreign powers, and even his threats toward election officials, fall under the umbrella of executive immunity. She paused, giving the room space to absorb. But executive immunity, she said slowly, was never designed to shield criminal behavior. It was designed to protect the integrity of the office, not the personal interests of the man occupying it. Trump scoffed audibly. You're twisting the Constitution. She turned, face calm. I'm citing Nixon v. Fitzgerald. You're the one twisting. A low ripple passed through the gallery. She flipped a page in her binder. The Supreme Court has ruled that a president is entitled to immunity from civil damages for acts within the outer perimeter of official responsibility, but inciting a mob, threatening state officials, spreading knowingly false claims to overturn an election, that perimeter doesn't stretch that far, Mr. Trump. He leaned in, jabbing a finger toward the mic. You're a congresswoman, not a judge. You don't get to interpret constitutional boundaries, and yet here we are, she said softly, in a committee sworn to uphold constitutional law, and you're here not because I summoned you, but because the law demanded it. He started to rise. I have every right to challenge you. Have the right, she interrupted, to remain silent. You might want to consider using it. The room broke. Laughter, gasps, even a stifled cough from one of the justices seated in observation. But she wasn't done. Crockett took a slow step forward. You've built your entire defense on the illusion that your title shields you, that power somehow places you above the consequences of your own words. She lifted a highlighted document, the classified memo Trump's team had tried to block from being entered into the record. This internal memo, signed off by two of your former legal advisors, shows that you were briefed on the constitutional limits of your powers as early as November 2020. You were warned that coercing state officials to find votes was unlawful. Trump's face reddened. You knew, and you did it anyway. Objection, one of Trump's lawyers started, but the chair held up a hand. Overruled. The document is part of the official record. Trump leaned back slowly, his mouth twitching not into a frown, but something more dangerous. Calculation. He wasn't used to being outmaneuvered like this, especially not by someone who wasn't supposed to matter in his world. Crockett turned back to the room. Presidents are not kings. They are not gods. They are public servants, bound by law and answerable to the people. This committee, this hearing, it's not just a legal inquiry, it's a line in the sand. It's about whether we allow anyone, even a former president, to operate above the Constitution. The silence that followed was profound, not empty, but full of the weight of history, of consequence, of reckoning. Crockett set her binder down. The question before us isn't whether Donald Trump had power. The question is whether we still believe the law has any power left. She sat. And in that moment, the chamber didn't feel like a political battlefield. It felt like a courtroom, a real one, where truth was still sacred and justice still mattered. Trump said nothing. For once, nothing. By the time Jasmine Crockett exited the Capitol, the sky was the color of rust and fire. Washington was cooling into dusk, but the internet was just waking up, hungry, furious, electrified. She didn't speak to reporters, didn't wave, just walked silently through the columns, her staff flanking her like shadows, the sounds of shouted questions and flashing cameras bouncing off the marble. But she didn't need to speak. She already had, and the whole world was listening now. 10:08 p.m. Twitter X. A clip of Crockett's line, "You have the right to remain silent. You might want to consider using it." hit 2 million views in 23 minutes. Within an hour, it became the #1 trending phrase globally. Hashtag Crockett vs Trump, hashtag executive immunity myth, hashtag you have a right. Journalists shared live reaction threads. Harvard Law professors broke down her arguments. TikTok exploded with edits, slow motion replay of her flipping the classified memo. Side-by side of her quote layered with Martin Sheen in The West Wing. One clip went viral for the sole reason that it caught Trump's exact facial expression after she called him not a king, not a god, but a public servant. Millions watched it on loop. 10:46 p.m. MSNBC panel goes off script. What we witnessed wasn't just a confrontation, it was a recalibration of how political accountability is understood in this country. Analyst, she didn't raise her voice once, she didn't posture. She dissected him legally, surgically, and the silence afterward, that wasn't from intimidation. That was respect. Even Fox News struggled to maintain its usual spin. One guest commentator called the exchange devastatingly articulate, even if politically weaponized. Another replied, "You can't weaponize the truth. You can only survive it or not." 11:13 p.m. Threads, Reddit, TikTok, YouTube Shorts. Reddit's Our Politics front page became a Crockett takeover. Jasmine's law class. Episode 1, Can We Clone Her? I haven't felt hope in 6 years. This was the first spark. TikTok. Lawyer Toke flooded the platform with stitch videos. Let's break down the moment she cited Nixon v. Fitzgerald. People don't understand how insane it is to bring a classified internal memo into a live hearing and not break a sweat. YouTube Shorts clips titled Jasmine Crockett destroys Trump's legal defense in 60 seconds racked up millions of views. Twitter X parody accounts popped up. Instantly @ Jasmine Gavel bio. Not your average congresswoman. I come with receipts. At Executive Reality Check 1221. AMAOC posts watching Jasmine Crockett drop constitutional law like thunder. That's leadership. That's how you remind them we are not afraid. 12:57 a.m. Trump campaign posts finally a response. The Trump campaign's official statement called the hearing a partisan witch trial and accused Crockett of slandering the legacy of the presidency. But the hashtags had already taken over. Comment sections were full of replies like, "Law isn't slander, it's a mirror. You weren't watching a witch trial. You were watching a history class, and you failed." 1:45 a.m. International headlines. The BBC ran with U.S. Congresswoman eviscerates Trump's immunity. Claim in historic exchange *. Le Monde headlined, "UNE le Khan Americain, Jasmine Crockett, defy Limonite, presidential even." Al Jazeera, The Guardian, and Der Spiegel carried overnight features. Her words had crossed borders, because it wasn't just about Trump anymore. It was about the idea that law could still mean something. 3:09 a.m. Text message from her father, "Baby girl, your mother would have cried watching that." She stared at the message for a long time, then locked her phone. 4 a.m. A meme emerges, a black and white image of Crockett holding the binder, captioned with, "Not above the law. J. Crockett." August 6, 2025. It spread like wildfire. Graffiti walls, protest signs, profile pictures. 6:30 a.m. The chair calls an emergency closed-door session. Too many phones. Too many cameras. Too much momentum. What began as another hearing had morphed into something else. Something neither party could contain anymore. The balance had shifted, and Jasmine Crockett hadn't just gone viral, that she had reshaped the field. In every empire, the real decisions aren't made under marble domes or before C-SPAN cameras. They're whispered behind smoked glass, over 12-figure scotches, in rooms with no clocks and no minutes recorded. After Jasmine Crockett's take of Trump ignited the public square, those rooms caught fire. The elite were watching and not all of them were pleased. 10 a.m. The donors panic in a penthouse on K Street. 3 men and 1 woman sat around a polished table worth more than the average home. They weren't politicians. They didn't need to be. They were the ones who wrote the scripts before the cameras rolled. "She made it look too clean," one of them said, tapping his pen against a donation ledger. "That kind of clarity is dangerous." "Trump's base isn't the threat anymore," said another. "It's her base. The young ones, the lawyers, the independents, the ones who think the system can be salvaged if someone like her leads it." They didn't speak her name with admiration. They spoke it like a stock about to disrupt the entire market. One of them made the call, "We can't afford another Obama. Not with this court. Not with these investigations." They began plotting counter-narratives before the first coffee of the day. 10:37 a.m. Democratic Party inner circle down the street. In a quiet back office of the DNC, an entirely different conversation was unfolding. She just broke the algorithm, whispered, a strategist, pointing at the charts. Latino, black, suburban, white women, every demographic moved overnight. She's cutting through the noise like a damn sword. Another voice, older, gruffer, we can't manage her. She's not polished. She's not approved. Exactly. Why they love her, someone else replied. They pulled up a video loop of her reading Trump's own emails into the congressional record. The energy in the room shifted. She's not a viral moment, said a younger staffer. She's the storyline now. Silence. Then so what do we do with her? 11:02 a.m. Hakeem Jeffries texts her HAKEM. That was nuclear. You okay, Jasmine? I'm fine, just tired. Hakeem, let's talk soon. Big doors might be opening. Just watch your back. She didn't reply for 15 minutes. Then, Jasmine, I always do. 11:45 a.m. Trump war room goes dark somewhere in Palm Beach. Trump's advisors sat in a sunless war room, surrounded by TV screens showing Crockett's moment, again and again. It's not just that she out-argued him, said Jason Miller. It's that she humiliated him without yelling. That's what sticks. People remember restraint. It makes her look smarter, stronger. Trump didn't say a word. He just stared at the screen like it owed him money. Then finally, she's lying. She used your own files, sir. She made it up. It's fake. A pause. We'll bury her. They started combing through every donation, every law school paper, every family member's social media. If Crockett had ever jaywalked, they planned to turn it into treason. 12:30 p.m. Clarence Thomas watches in silence in a private chamber deep inside the Supreme Court. Justice Clarence Thomas watched Crockett's performance in full. He didn't flinch, didn't blink. His age shifted nervously. She made reference to the Fitzgerald case. He noted. Thomas nodded. She's building a legal pipeline, not just a viral one. A long pause. Then the justice said softly, if she brings a challenge, we may not be able to stop it. Not publicly. 1:45 p.m. The Texas delegation splinters back in Jasmine's home state. Texas Democrats were divided. Some saw her as the rising voice of a new generation, fierce intellectual, and unafraid of fire. Others whispered that she was getting too loud, too front-facing, too risky for backroom politics. One representative said in private, she's going to make a lot of enemies, the kind who smile in your face while funding your opponent. They started fielding calls about potential primary challenges. 3:30 p.m. Black women in politics start mobilizing in Atlanta, Detroit, and Los Angeles. Group chats of black women organizers lit up like brushfire. She's not just clapping back. She's rewriting the whole ******ing playbook. Dozens of local PACs pooled funds before the day ended, not because she asked, but because they knew what came next. They'd seen it before. The pushback, the smear campaigns, the subtle silencing, but this time they were already ahead of it. 5:00 p.m. Jasmine's office receives 11 death threats. Thirds FBI is looped in. Security detail doubled. Still, she walks out that evening without flinching. 6 p.m. She sits alone with her binder back in her DC apartment. She finally breathes. The binder, the same one she slammed down in the hearing, is open on her kitchen table. Next to it, a highlighter, a list of sealed cases, a post-it that simply says, they didn't see the next part coming. She smiles. Because this isn't over. Not even close. The courtroom had never been louder than it had been seconds ago, and now it had never been quieter. After Jasmine's explosive, pinpoint precise takedown of Trump's outburst, the oxygen seemed to vanish from the room. The judge hadn't even struck the gavel. She didn't need to. The silence was its own kind of sentence, one louder than anything Trump could have possibly shouted. Jasmine's final words still hung in the air. You want to talk about who belongs here? Then answer for the women, the lies, and the billions, hidden from the people you swore to serve. Trump, who moments ago had roared, "Get out," like a man still drunk on absolute power, now stood rigid, eyes narrowing, jaw tight, hands clenched behind the defense bench. No retort, no insult, not even a smirk, just a flicker of something unfamiliar on his face. Uncertainty. Jasmine didn't move. She stood tall in the middle of the courtroom, arms relaxed but presence volcanic-like, a flame refusing to flicker out, burning with the memory of every silenced woman, every buried truth, every smear campaign she'd survived. Behind her murmurs began a low current of voices from the gallery, approval, disbelief, admiration. C-SPAN's live feed numbers ticked upward by the thousands every minute. Twitter threads exploded. Clips of the confrontation were already flooding the digital veins of the nation. Hashtags #Crockett comeback, number 46 seconds, #get out moment. Reporters rushed out of the courthouse like bees loosed from a hive, shouting into their phones, broadcasting what had just occurred like it was a seismic shift in American discourse outside. Protesters on both sides froze mid-chant, staring at their phones as word spread. A viral tremor cracked through the political atmosphere. Jasmine Crockett had not only stood her ground, she had leveled it. And in that moment, the power dynamics shifted not in favor of Democrats or Republicans, but in favor of accountability. Crockett hadn't won applause. She'd won something deeper, witness. She'd forced the nation to bear witness to truth without theatrics, to confrontation without cruelty. In the judge's chambers later, a clerk whispered to her colleague, "That wasn't a courtroom. That was history." And in homes across America, millions of people leaned back from their screens, breath held, eyes wide, processing what they had just seen. A man who'd spent decades controlling the narrative had, in 46 seconds, lost it. To a woman who refused to be erased, history didn't wait for permission. Neither did Jasmine Crockett. The courtroom slowly emptied, but the echo of Jasmine's voice clung to the marble walls like smoke after a fire. Staffers exchanged hushed glances as they shuffled papers with trembling hands. Security guards stood, at attention, unusually stiff, unsure whether they were witnessing the aftermath of a political ambush, or the beginning of something bigger. Jasmine stepped out into the hallway with a calm exterior, but her chest still burned not with fear, but with clarity. Every step echoed louder than the last. Her heels struck the floor like punctuation marks in a sentence America had been waiting decades to finish. Cameras were already waiting outside the chamber doors. Not paparazzi, not political pundits, but everyday citizens, some streaming on Instagram Live, others just clutching phones in shaky hands. Their eyes didn't carry the hungry gleam of media opportunism. They looked at her like she had given them language for what they couldn't say at their own kitchen tables. A young black girl in a navy hoodie hesitated at the edge of the crowd. Jasmine noticed. She slowed. The girl stepped forward. "Did you mean all of it?" Jasmine crouched just enough to meet her gaze. "Every word, and the ones they wouldn't let me say." The girl blinked hard. "I thought people like him couldn't be touched." Jasmine smiled, soft and sharp at once. "They can't be touched by fear, but they can be reached by truth. Loud enough, long enough, they hear it, whether they admit it or not." Phones rose higher, flashes blinked, but Jasmine didn't flinch. Her eyes moved down the hallway where, just moments ago, Trump had stormed out his entourage, trailing like shadows, suddenly unsure of their master's footing. Inside, Trump was still fuming. His advisors flanked him in the holding lounge, throwing out ideas, counterattacks, threats of lawsuits, all while his expression darkened into something unreadable. Not rage, he was used to rage. No, this was something colder, disbelief that someone had taken the stage he'd built for himself, and used it to light him on fire. "She was supposed to be a side note," one of them muttered. Trump's voice came low. "She just became the headline." Back in the hallway, Jasmine kept walking past the murmurs, past the headlines scrolling across every screen, past her own staff who looked both stunned and proud. She didn't bask in it. She didn't gloat. The work wasn't over. One aide leaned in. "There's already talk of you chairing the next hearing. MSNBC wants an exclusive."